A brief disclaimer. Only two tools have been used to make this work. It is Ultimate Doom Builder for map editor and GZ Doom for source port that allows us to use fancy features of the engine. You may be able to achieve similar results with other source ports and different level editors, so this video should be useful for many creators because it explains the main concept and functionality that is present in different editors and engines. So today we are going to have a short video about making sliding doors in Doom. The standard engine doesn't allow much. Normally all the doors either open up or close down because they are technically just floor or ceiling sectors. But there is a written tutorial on how you can make polyobjects, and I want to expand on it a bit by demonstrating how can you make them finite. Now, typically if you make a polyobject, it goes from the floor to the ceiling, so it's like a door with infinite height. If you have a level with the ceiling and the floor, like a room, it's fine, but if you want to make an open world or a sky above, then it's going to be a problem. So to demonstrate that, I'll skip ahead and show you how it works, and then show you the steps necessary to create it. So we have arrived at the building with a door. In typical Doom, this would open downwards because it would be a part of the floor, but it's actually a separate object. So if I can use it, you can see it will slide to the side. And what's the most important thing about this is that it's not going infinitely up or down. You see, it has a limited height. So for example, let me try to demonstrate that. If I go on top, you see I can go across it. So it is an object which is technically a sector. Like if you use the builder, you know what it is. But it's a sector. And the only way why it is not walkable through is the texture. So the texture itself is blocking me, but the sector is moving back and forth. So I'll demonstrate how to set it up in Doom Builder. So the way to set up is that I have this empty sector here. So it's just a rectangle which has a polyobject start spot. So from this object we have the polyobject spawned, and the polyobject must exist somewhere on the level. In this case it's very far away here, and this is the actual door. It is inside of this area. Here it is, but it's only 3D because the texture itself is making the object. So if I would set up on this texture wrap middle texture, now it's infinite, it's going up. So this is what typical polyobject looks like, but because the middle texture is not wrapped and the walkable middle texture is enabled, that's why it has a limited height. So technically if you want to make a shorter draw, you would have to have a shorter graphic. So the sprite itself, or the texture itself, actually sets the size of the object. So let's look at the way it is set up. So let's make a room, put a player in, and test that it works. And I want to make it a shorter room, like a normal one, where I can demonstrate you typical polyobjects. So this is a typical room where I don't have anything, right? Make a sector in the place where we want to have the door. Let's say this is going to be our door. If it was a typical Doom, we would either make it from the ceiling or from the floor, and then we would set up the action to move it up and down. That's how the Doom works because it's 2D. But instead we want to put here something called polyobject, something that will be created post factum after the engine is started, and placed from another area. So we want to make a dummy sector first. Make sure to put it somewhere outside of your play bounds. So this is a room which you normally do not see. And we'll copy paste the sector and put it here so we know it's the same size. So this is going to be our door, right? So at first, let's delete the sector. You see now it's deleted and it's just a column. We can put some texture in it. So at this moment, if you start, nothing will happen because there is no reference. So the way we mark this object as a poly object is that we select one of the 4 sides or more sides and mark it as POLYOBJECT start line. So now, because one of the sides of the column is marked as POLYOBJECT start line, that's why this is considered a poly object. And here we can set up the number. So you can have a lot of poly objects, but each of them must have a unique ID number. So the only thing left to do is to anchor them together. This sector, which is turned into the column, right? And this sector in the play area. So on the poly object, which has POLYOBJECT start line, we are placing POLYOBJECT anchor. So this will be shown which part of the poly object will be anchored to the game world. It's like a location which will be moved when it's spawned. So if you put it in this corner, we would also want to put POLYOBJECT start spot in the same corner. So now you can see this anchor will make this column appear in the place of this start spot. I already used the poly object. So let's give it a number. So this is our poly object. Let's say it will be number 10. On the anchor, we want to give it angle 10 because it tells you which poly object it belongs to. So the angle is actually the ID. And on start spot, we also want to use angle 10. Let's try this out. Now it should work. Yeah, so now you see that column was teleported here. So technically, it's a separate object from the level geometry. So now we can do whatever. The actual use of poly objects is quite interesting. They can be operated with different move operators. So if you select one of the sides, you can consider this as a use side of the door. So when you press use on the door, you can select the side, make the same repeatable action when player press use, and now it will act like an activator, like a button. And the action will be starting with poly object, and here you see rotation, move, you have door swing, door slide, and other actions. So if you want to reproduce the sliding door, you would select door slide, give it a speed, give it poly object, which is 10 at this moment. The angle will define in which direction it will slide. So 0 is to the right. You can see it here. Right? This is the angle. So let's say we'll make it moving to the west. Okay? And the distance is how far it will go. If I say 1, it will barely move. If I say 1000, it will slide away. And the delay is how long it will wait until it closes back. If you set no delay, it will be a one-time action. And you can keep pushing it with a repeatable action. Right, so let's say 3 seconds. Moving to the left, the west, with movement distance 64. And make sure you put it on the actual wall, on the poly object, and not on the fake sector that you have here, because this sector is simply indicating the location. Okay, so let's see what happens if I press use on this side now. Look, it's sliding, waiting 3 seconds, and then it will move back. Okay, so this is a typical tutorial how you make a sliding poly object, but there is one problem. This poly object is infinite. So if you wanted to have a building door and a ceiling above, you would be disappointed. So let me demonstrate this. So let me show you what I mean by the problem by infinite poly object. So you see, it goes to the very, very ceiling, and you cannot go across it. Right? So how do we fix that? Well, this is something took me a while to understand and makes it a bit more complicated. So at first, this should no longer be a column. This should be a sector. But if we leave it as is, it won't appear in a map. Instead, we have to make it a self-referencing sector. So this is something that took me a moment to realize. So self-referencing sector is a sector that has all sides pointing to itself. Normally, if you check the properties of the sector, you can see that one side has an index and another side has another index. So it's telling you which sector it belongs to. So the back side, it is the one opposite from this small arrow or line. The internal sector is 301, the external sector is 300, because the front side is where you have this small notch. So we need to make this sector, actually all of its lines, reference the external sector only. So we know that the front goes up and the external sector is 300. So we are setting the other side also as 300. Basically, we are breaking the geometry of Doom. So the same here. The front is 300, the back is 300. Make sure you are referencing not the internal sector, but the external sector. Because there's one more step missing. You have to change all your sides to a very specific action type called POLYOBJECT explicit line. So all of the sides have to be this. And then you need to mention the POLYOBJECT number, and the rendering order doesn't matter much. You can make it 1 from Hexen, it comes, I think. Right, so now we have the explicit line on every side of this self-referencing sector. Each line references external sector index on front and on the back. And it mentions which POLYOBJECT number it is. You see, now we don't have here anything else at all, so you have to give it a middle texture. Middle texture is what creates the geometry. So let's make a door of any kind. Let's say this one. Okay, I like it. So we are putting the door in the middle texture. Normally this is like a window or like a fence sprite. And do not forget to enable walkable middle texture because it makes it a solid object. So now if we go back, you can see that the door is here. Oh, it's huge, actually. I should have picked a different texture, probably. This will do. And then, if you want this to be on the floor, you would want to set it to lower unpegged. If you set upper unpegged, it will go on the ceiling. If lower unpegged, it will go on the floor. Okay? So now we have this object, which we can make a bit nicer if you want. Align it, etc. It represents our door. So now you can see it is no longer going to the very ceiling. It's limited in height by the texture that you put in. The problem you may encounter now is that you cannot really use it because the lines are already busy by the explicit line. So because it already has this explicit line POLYOBJECT thing, you cannot activate it anymore. So you should do the following as a solution. At first, let's mark the sides that you want to activate as repeatable and when player presses use. This way they will still have the property of being able to be pressed. The only thing left to actually give it some action is through the script. So because the editor is busy with explicit line, you cannot put the script here. Instead, you have to give it any tag. Let's give it tag 88, for example. Right? So now you have to give the lines with tag 88 a script which will move the POLYOBJECT. You do that by going to the script editor, F10 by default, and you want to write a script with open type. Open means whenever this map is accessed for the first time. So script, let's say open great open. So this would be a correct script by itself without doing anything. So what we want to do, we want to give it a script type set line special. That will give a specific line a special ability. So the first value is the ID. We marked both lines as 88. Let's double check that. Tag 88, right? So, and then we would want it to execute. So it's ACS execute function and then the script number. Let's say make a script number 88 to have the same number as the ID on the doors, the tag, but we can make it any other number, 89, so don't be confused. So now we only need to write the script, what the door will actually do. Script 88 is not, sorry, 89 is a number, and it's without parameters, so we put void there, and here we write what we want. And there are a bunch of actions which are the same as you can find in the specials here. So if you look up here, you have POLYOBJECT, rotate, left, rotate, right, move, door swing, door slide, move to spot, stop, etc. So you can start typing POLYOBJECT, and it will give you a bunch of options. It's POLYOBJECT underscore and then what you want. So door slide is the one that we need. So it's POLYOBJECT number 10. Let me remind you, we can double check that if we go back to the property of any of the lines we made. Here, POLYOBJECT number 10. Then we want to set the speed. Let's say it will be a slow one, so 8. Angle is the direction. So if you don't remember the angle, you can check it here. You could select POLYOBJECT door slide, for example, and then click on the angle to see what it is. So if you want to go left, it's 128. I'll cancel it because I want all the lines to be an explicit line. So the 128 is the angle, and it will stay for 3 seconds. 1 second is 35 ticks, so 3 will be 105. It's missing something else. The distance, how long it will travel. I want to travel 128 units. This editor is pretty useful because it will give you the list of arguments we need to do. Now, if you run it, you'll see that these lines have action now. If you press use, now they're moving, waiting, and then moving back. I made it 3 seconds wait and then going back, right? So this is how you make limited height POLYOBJECT. Just to summarize, you make a sector somewhere outside of the map, and you create a POLYOBJECT here. If you wanted it to be an infinite tall POLYOBJECT, you would make it a column, but if you don't, you make it self-referencing sector. So you make all the lines look outside. Normally you press F for that. You give the front sector index to the back sector index. You give it some texture, make it walkable and lower unpegged. And of course you put this texture in the middle because you want this to be like a wall. And see, now we made this square. You put an anchor, and in the angle you set up the number of POLYOBJECTs. So let's say this one is number 11. You make each line a type POLYOBJECT explicit line for POLYOBJECT number 11 and render in order 1, right? If you want some of the lines to be activatable, you give them ID like 111 and make it repeatable action when player presses use. Right? Then you put the actual POLYOBJECT location by marking it with a sector and putting the start spot. On the start spot, you make sure to set up the same angle as the POLYOBJECT number. And now you have a POLYOBJECT which is solid and it is limited in height. The only thing left to do is, if you want these two sides to be activated by pressing use, like to open a door, you remember the tag, you go to script editor, and you create the open script to give it a special. So here you put 111. Then you must execute a script you write which slides the door, let's say with speed 64 for the distance of 32 and this delay of 35, which is 1 second. So this should be 11. So now, going back, if you use this POLYOBJECT, you'll see that it's going to slide like a door too. And now much faster because of the parameters. Honestly, it was a bit of a conundrum making work the self-referencing sector and limited height POLYOBJECT. So I hope this is going to be useful for somebody. And I'll see you in the future. Bye bye.